I flew out to LA. I'd never been there before, and I was incredibly intimidated by it because it was so foreign an environment to me. You know, being from Buffalo, you don't see many palm trees. And my biggest impression of the lot was it was a teeny little lot, the Radford lot, but they had the old Gunsmoke Dodge City town still up. So you could walk down Dodge City Main Street like Marshall Dillon did.
The Dodge City Street on a set over at CBS Studios there in Studio City. And so that we were able to do all the streets were actually interiors on a stage. But, and that, of course, worked very well because anytime it was the Dodge City Street, we were able to do it on the stage and have everything right there and do it. It was a great time saver.
And they had the Gilligan's Lagoon, though it didn't have water in it. They had Gilligan's Lagoon and a couple of other things like that where I was like, whoa, this is like, you know, these are all places that I visited without ever coming here before.
They had not selected a site for Gilligan's Island. And I talked to the production manager of CBS Studio Center, who I knew. And he said, Bill, we're in trouble. We're supposed to be on the air in 6 weeks, and we have no Gilligan's Island. I said, what are we going to do about it? And he said, well, I'll show you. So he takes me outside, and right beneath the office window is valley floor, you know, just like desert floor. Nothing there. He said, this is Gilligan's Island. I said, so what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to dig 6 feet down, fill it with city water, and I'm going to block out all the wires and all the telephone poles. And I said, what about the traffic? We were just off Ventura. He said, we've checked it out. No problem. We're going to dampen it down with as much potted foliage as we can get. So I said, start digging.
So CBS built us a lagoon right at the CBS lot. And we'd be outside in the lagoon or in the sand, and then all the huts and everything were indoors.
When they took out the lagoon and paved it and made it into a parking lot, they saved the last piece for me. As you can see.
There's the last remaining piece of the set of Gilligan's Island right there.
That's right here.
Here, we had 3 permanent sound stages at 20th Century Fox. We had Stage 11, Stage 5, and I think it was Stage 24. And in those days, the back lot of 20th Century Fox was Century City. I mean, we had, you know, jungle areas. And what was enticing and fun for a kid was the lot itself. The whole studio is like a family because you go to the commissary almost I'm sure we went off lot sometimes, but you were in the commissary almost every day, and you know that you're hanging out with Mia Farrow from, you know, Peyton Place, and you're hanging out with Adam West from Batman, and you know, I'm hanging with Bruce Lee, who taught me like cat kicks and stuff. So if I knew for a fact I had like some time and I wasn't going to get in trouble, I would steal a golf cart from somebody and just, you know, go rambling around the lot and go visit the Planet of the Apes or go visit Fantastic Voyage and just walk on a sound stage.
MASH was shot in 2 places. It was shot on the Fox lot on Stage 9, and it was shot at the Malibu Ranch when that portion of the Malibu Canyon Park belonged to 20th Century Fox.
The last episode that aired, the 2-hour movie, was not the last thing we shot. The last show that we shot was the show that was shown right before that. I think it was a show having to do with burying a chest of memorabilia.
Well, I got this idea. I said, hey, guys, why don't we take some of our things that we have for real, put it in one of these watertight Red Cross boxes, and bury it on the lot at 20th Century Fox. And maybe 25, 30 years later, tell everybody about it. Be a great story. So they said, yes, you're right. So what do? We'll figure out what we want to leave in this box, and we'll do it at nighttime after everybody's left the studio, and we'll dig a hole, and we'll bury it there. So we tried to figure out where was the best place to bury the thing. We thought, well, right near the commissary, because we figured the commissary would always be stationary.
And we thought maybe 50 years later somebody would find it. We didn't realize that 20th Century Fox, in its incredible greed, was selling off everything that they had. And they sold off half of their commissary. They had this kind of historic commissary where Shirley Temple used to eat lunch and her picture was on the wall. They cut it right in half and they sold that off for a building to build an office building. And they started digging within a few months after we buried our capsule. And some construction worker called me up and said, I got this thing, you want it? I said, no, I don't want it, it's for whoever found it. He says, oh, well, what'll I do with it? It's probably being sold on eBay right now for a fortune, but I thought it would be fun for somebody. It wasn't even fun for this guy. He said, well, what'll I do with this? I said, I don't know, it's yours.
We thought it was a great idea. Sorry, I wish I could say, it's still there, and after this interview, we'll go and dig it up. Long gone.
We shot at Paramount Studios, Stage 5. That was our home.
And no audience was present?
No, never an audience unless people came to visit the set. I remember Henry Kissinger came, John Wayne, his then wife Pilar. A lot of people whose kids loved the show would come and visit the set. And they would all want to go up those stairs and see what was upstairs. And I'd always go, oh no, I don't think you want to go. Oh, not right now, the rooms are a mess. I didn't want to disappoint these little kids because you climb the flight of stairs and you get up there and there was nothing except a lot of lights and wires and things like that. So I would try to preserve their little fantasies.
And everybody would come over to the taxi set because we had all the parties. We had a great party after every show, and 4 times a year we had a kick-ass killer party that would go overnight till everybody went out for breakfast. That was usually held in the commissary at Paramount and all the other shows. Because at that time, Paramount was like the craziest place. It was like going to the greatest high school. And I think that, you had Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Working Stiffs with Michael Keaton and Jim Belushi. You had, and Mork and Mindy, of course, with Robin and Pam, Robin Williams and Pam Dauber. You had all the Happy Days people, Ron Howard and Henry Winkler, and of course Penny Marshall, and it just went on and on and on. But you also had like Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks and Peter Scolari, so you had all these different shows there, and everybody would usually come through the taxi because everybody knew somebody from our show.
Jack Warner hated television, and he would not allow us as directors to have in a set, like a living room set. He said, you cannot have a TV set. We're not giving those bastards any free publicity. He was that kind of guy. So the New York office got to him about a year later and said, Mr. Warner, we're dropping the ball here. Fox is in it, Paramount's in it, MGM's in it. They're all in it except Warner Brothers. So the old man, reluctantly said, all right, let's make some television, but we're not going to make any crap. We're going to make good stories and so on and so forth. So the first project that got off the ground was Cheyenne.
The fact that I was with Warner Brothers, I was really blessed to go with Warner Brothers, who was one of the biggest studios in the world, and certainly in Hollywood. And they had the know-how, they had the equipment, they had the stages, they had the film library. And a lot of the Cheyennes, the stories would call for 1,000 head of cattle if we were doing a cattle drive. And so they would just simply go back in the film library and the cutter would cut in that film, and they would do it in such a clever way that it really looked like we had 1,000 head of cattle there. But they would do that with trains and big country scenery and so on. And it really helped to give Cheyenne a feature look.
So I found an apartment about a mile away from Universal Studios on Cahuenga Boulevard, right across from what at that time was Hanna-Barbera. And I would walk to work every day, you know, because, you know, and I was so excited. I mean, I couldn't believe that here I was going to be making $115 a week in the mailroom. This is 1971 now, 72. In the mailroom, or at Universal Studios. I mean, and the way it worked, that every week you delivered a different mail to a different area. You would be delivering mail to the prop department on one week. The second week you'd be delivering mail to the wardrobe department. So the idea was to become familiar with every aspect of a studio and how a studio operates. You also would be delivering mail to stars. I mean, on my mail route there was Alfred Hitchcock, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, and they were on your mail route. And in the music department, I mean, the closest I ever came to getting fired is that I love jazz, and one time on my mail route, I saw that Quincy Jones was there doing the score for Ironside, and I I intentionally went onto the recording stage, and there was Harry Sweets Edison. I mean, jazz giants I'd listened to in Chicago, and Ray Brown and Oliver Nelson conducting this, you know, the score for Ironside, and it was just, and I was late because that was my, you know, everything was timed, and I got back a little late, including getting Alfred Hitchcock his paper late, and he complained, where's my paper? Because he was a sports fan, and he always wanted his paper early, but I was just mesmerized by this all-star jazz band on the sound stage.
One show I did, Wagner, with Betty Davis. It was Universal Studios. Bunch of squares, unbelievable squares running in the studio. It was a 5-day show. About the third day in, when I went to do the close-ups on Betty Davis, the actress overlapped her, spoke well. I hear somebody say, "Cut." And I turned, I said, "Oh, what?" I thought maybe an airplane. I don't hear him, usually. I said, what happened? He said, "Sound man said you had an overlap." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "That's when two people talk over." I said, "I know what it means." I said, "But how do you dare cut my camera?" The assistant director said to me, "That's the rules. No overlaps are allowed to be printed." I said, "What are you talking about? I know how to cut an overlap. I know where he's done. You're not allowed to." And I get in this hassle on the set. And in comes the suits. And they pull me aside and they said, "I don't know what you think you're doing at the studio. We have rules and you'll stick to them." I said, "Listen, guys, I know how to cut an overlap. If I want to use an overlap, it just means I've got the actors going. They're hyped. It's great. They don't have to wait. I can get in and get out with a pair of suits." He said, "You can't do that. You're not going to be allowed to. And if you don't like the way we work around here, you're out." And a little voice in the back said, "If Mr. Donner goes, I go." And there's Betty Davis sitting behind us, and she was knitting. And they all turned to her and said, "Miss Davis?" She said, "I hope you heard me." She said, "If Mr. Donner goes, I go." And they looked at each other and they left the set, and I was banned from that studio for 2 or 3 years. It was a good income I lost, but man, I was kind of happy, and I loved her for it.
On Armis Brooks, we used the same crew that Lucy used, and we were in adjacent stages. It was a big door that opened between the two sound stages. It was a movie studio we were shooting at. Of course, all the shows in those days, we moved into movie studios. There weren't television studios, and so there was these great sound stages, and this one had a huge door between that we opened, and we would listen to their rehearsal, they'd listen to our rehearsal, and then we would switch over, and we had their crew. They would work 2 days for us and 2 days for Lucy. First, we were filming at Paramount, which became Paramount Desilu, and then they bought their own studio and called it the Desilu Studio, which was on Cahuenga Street.
I started at Desilu. The first day, it was a Monday, I'm supposed to be there. I drive down to Hollywood, and I can't find the place. But I saw a big studio, and I went closer, and it says Paramount Pictures. And I said, that's not it. Then I realized when you leave Melrose Boulevard and drive up Little Short Irving Boulevard, there's the Paramount Gate. But if you take a left, way at the end of this little road is the entrance to Desilu Studios. Desilu owned 3 studios then. Desilu Culver was the old RKO studio. Desilu Cahuenga, I forget the original name of it, but it's called Desilu Cahuenga. There, Danny Thomas show was done, Dick Van Dyke show was done, you name them, they were done. Gorma Pyle worked out of that studio, etc. Then there was Desilu Culver, the old Pathé studio, huge studio, that had the back lot, which was called 40 Acres, but was no longer 40 Acres because I believe the city of Culver City had moved in and taken some of it for a drainage project or whatever. But it's where David Selznick shot the famous Atlanta scene for Gone with the Wind. It was the studio they used to produce Gone with the Wind.
When they ended up buying RKO Studio and turning it into Desilu, I was, 6, something like that, around that age. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever that suddenly Mom and Dad owned. They actually said they owned this whole place. So if I wanted to go to the prop department and just fool around for an hour and a half, I could. Like the guy would say, oh yeah, come on in, Lucy. Come on in, little Desi. Come on in. And they just go let us play with King Kong and all those amazing things that were in there. And it was magical. Magical.
After lunch, we would roam through some of the byways of the studio lot, and he would tell me that used to be Alan Ladd's dressing room. Dressing room. It was like a whole house, living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom upstairs, and all. That was Clark Gable's dressing room, or that's where the dancers changed. That was a bungalow. That's the writers' bungalow. That's where the writers were housed.
Was your mother very involved in the business side?
No, God, no. She hated the business side. She gets a lot of credit for having run, the first woman to run a studio. Hated that whole thing. Hated it. Just wanted to be Lucy. Just wanted to do her show and not be worried about any of that business stuff. That was Desi's. That was my father's, domain. And when it didn't work out, that he was going to leave and she had to buy him out, she kept all the same people that he had hired, brilliant people, and took their advice for the most part. She relied on them as well she should. Made a couple of pretty good decisions on her own just by the seat of her pants. Like, no, let's not cancel Star Trek. I like that. I don't care if it's expensive.
Star Trek was done on a very, very tough, very tightly controlled budget. Very fast shooting schedule. And my understanding, although I wasn't privy to it because I wasn't a producer on the show or even a director or anything, I was just, I was hired as an actor. My understanding was that the show had to be sold at a very low price, otherwise the network wouldn't buy it. So it was sold to be made at a very low cost. And budget considerations were constant. Every once in a while, if we were over budget on a show here or there, they'd write us a show which could take place almost exclusively on the ship, because all those sets were available. Whereas building another set for some other kind of story or going out on location would be an additional expense. So every once in a while, we would do what they used to call a bottle show, which means that the script was tightly contained, all of it taking place within existing sets to save money.
We would usher the Dick Van Dyke show. So we would go over to Desilu Cahuenga, and that was a show that was done on film, 3-camera film it was called, and they had an audience. And before every show, Carl would introduce Bill Persky and Sam Denoff, who were writers and story editors, I guess, in those days. I remember thinking, clearly, those are the luckiest guys in the world. I mean, they get to go to work every day and put their hands in and their minds to work on this terrific, successful, funny, highly respected show.
Lucille Ball was our landlady at that point. She owned Desilu, and we'd be rehearsing on the set, and very much involved, absorbed in our work, and then we'd hear a laugh that wasn't coming from the floor, and we looked up, and there she was on the catwalk, you know, that sort of rope ladder that allows the lighting guys to hang their lights, and she'd be up there watching us, just observing us, and then she'd come down, and this happened on a couple of occasions. It was funny. And she would talk to Dick and say, gee, I saw the show last week and it was really great. You are so funny. And she had something nice to say about everybody. And I will never forget one day she sort of walked out of the studio and then came back and came up to me and she said, you're very good. And then walked on. And that was the greatest gift I ever received in this business. I don't think I have another moment that compares with the impact of those words.